Quarter century, not out. We're here for Path to Power to assess the European local elections. The seats have been filled. The dust is settling. We have all the inside stories courtesy of Ivan's contacts and our analysis too. Let's start, Ivan, with those who got their seats in the European Parliament elections, because I'm calling this the TV election, right? You look at those who managed to get through and get elected. Nina Carberry in Ireland, Midlands, North West, who was silent, almost mute throughout the entire election campaign, but not just a champion jockey, but somebody who was very well known for Dancing with the Stars winner in 2022. Kieran Mullooly also elected in that constituency, known to people only by the fact that he was the face of the Midlands for RTE for 20 plus years. Never in that role expressed an opinion. He was a straightforward reporter, but the likeability factor helped him enormously. And then down in Ireland South, Cynthia Ní Murchú, who hasn't really been on our television screens for nearly 30 years, used to present the Lotto in its early days and benefited from all those social media videos in recent months of 30 years from Riverdance, because there's herself and Jerry Ryan introducing Riverdance. And even if there's a certain generation who never would have heard of Cynthia Ní Murchú, there they were introduced to her via Riverdance. So you can have your career in politics, you can work from the ground up, and in the end, the European Parliament candidates, it's a celebrity race. And if you've been on television, you'll do better than a fella on radio who didn't win his seat.
Well, first of all, I said to you back in December in our very first thing, the one thing, so if we were running a new party, who will we get to run? Name recognition is number one.
Yeah, TV personalities.
Yeah, so that ticks that box.
Jesus, Ivan, you might have a career in politics ahead of you.
So we'll just take those one by one. Nina Carberry, a number of Fine Gael TDs in Leinster said to me, poor campaign, hasn't connected with the Oireachtas party, the councillors, unlikely to make it, being kept off the media, as you said. And last Friday, just to keep my sanity, I took the 101, the 102 bus up to Ratoath and I went to Fairyhouse Races. And I met Noel Meade, who would have been one of her biggest mentors over the years as a jockey and this kind of thing. You know, a very seasoned guy. And he says, how's Nina going to do? And I said, well, they'll have to get 2 seats for her to make it. They're all saying there's only 1 seat for Fine Gael and it'll be Maria. And he said, I'll tell you this about her. He said, if it came to polishing windows and there was a national competition, she'd win it. She is the most hardworking, intense person I've ever come across in the entire racing industry. And if you go through some of the personalities, yes, of course, without their name recognition, they could go to any town or village and they would be instantly recognised. And in a kind of, like, some people love Father Ted and some people, I don't get Father Ted, right? But this kind of lovely...
How can you not get Father Ted?
No, I don't find it funny. But the point about it is my children find it hilarious, but I find it infantile. But the point is this.
Oh my God.
No, but the whole thing of, come in and have a cup of tea. That is the vote that Nina clicked into there. We remember her on Dancing, and that kind of decency, particularly amongst older women, I would say, and men, that just have this nice spot for them. Conversely, nastiness on social media did not poll well. And so therefore, I would say in politics, it is a charm offensive, and it's always nice to be nice is one of the vital political people skills you need.
And indeed, Moscow Mick and Kremlin Claire weren't particularly nice in recent years.
Well, not only that, and we picked this up. So people say the zinger of the campaign was more attention to Kremlin than the Kremlin and all of that good stuff.
That was what Barry Andrews said to Claire Daly during the RT primetime debate.
Okay. So the situation is here that if you actually drill into this, when in February 22, Russia invaded eastern Ukraine, there was a motion condemning the military invasion into Ukraine, and in the parliament it was something like 705 votes to 13 against the condemnation, and 2 who were against it were Mick and Claire. When it came to issues in Belarus, when it came to issues in Syria, consistently, and issues for China, they were voting almost as pariah MEPs in the eyes of the mainstream. So this was not the figment of a campaign imagination. The fact of the matter is, a zinger just doesn't have to be alliteration or catchy like a song. It actually has to have a germ of truth in it. And that's the flaw in which Mick Wallace and Claire Daly got no mandate to be pro-Moscow, pro-the Kremlin, and they spent their 4 years, particularly since the invasion, of actually doubling down on that. And what they actually tried to do in the campaign was parade as peaceniks, and they actually quoted in 2022 a particular initiative which was for a ceasefire in Ukraine. And you know what that ceasefire was really about? It was about the surrender of Ukraine and rolling over to the Russians. And they were parading this, no, we were always for peace. But actually you weren't, mate. You were actually for the Ukrainians being suppressed.
Here's something else that's interesting, and others who lost their seats. Did you know, and I didn't know this till I read it this morning, that there has never been an alternate who has managed to keep the seat when standing for election? So when Fine Gael got rid of Colin Markey, who took Mairead McGuinness's seat, they got rid of him on the basis they felt nobody knows who he is. People would feel he only got there because he came in Mairead McGuinness's coattails, and they axed him for Nina Carberry. So your man, the Sinn Féin guy...
Chris McManus.
Yeah, Chris McManus, who got in from Matt Carthy, saying, no, he has a pretty extraordinary voting record in the European Parliament as well. He wouldn't have been in the...
Chris McManus,
yes,
or...
McManus. He wouldn't have been...
A lot of abstentions.
A lot of abstentions, and not a million miles removed from Mick Wallace and Claire Daly on some of the things that he was interested in, although he tended more to abstain than to vote the way that might have been wanted. But anyway, the point is, he didn't have the recognition. Now, you can also say Sinn Féin didn't run two good candidates, and that Michelle Gildernew was not particularly well known in the Republic, despite being an MP up north. But it just goes to show the alternates are not good candidates to run.
Absolutely. And I've written down some of the learnings for Sinn Féin from this, but one of them is, as you say, that Chris McManus was, when they actually ended up with Kathleen Funchion getting elected, like where we were this time last week was there'll be one seat each for the three big parties, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Sinn Féin. Now, obviously, Sinn Féin, which we'll come to, had their worst ever day.
To not get one in Midlands Northwest, when you think of all of the border constituencies included in that, and the places where they expect to do well in the general election. Now, I know that they could say they split the vote by having two candidates, but...
That probably helped. The point is they should have run Martin Kenny. They should run a TD from the Northwest. They could have even run a Donegal candidate. It was a fatal mistake not polling McManus privately and saying, you know what, thank you for your service, but good luck, we're going to run a TD to keep the... And that was an absolute selection error, and Fine Gael had a selection error as well.
Okay, well actually just come to Dublin for a second. Sorry, Fine Gael is selection error in Midlands Northwest?
No, in South.
Oh, South. We'll get to that in a second. So let's come to Dublin and... Barry Andrews and Regina Doherty.
Well, first of all, a little bit of credit for Ivan. I said it'd be a wipeout for the Greens. 44 councillors down to 23. No MEP. People are very quick to say, Ivan, you got that one wrong. People are still talking. I was doing a radio thing with Jennifer McNeil, and the first thing she said, this is the guy who predicted I was going to not get elected back in 2020. People don't forget these things.
No, and we'll get to some of your predictions that didn't go right later in this podcast.
Yeah.
But you are correct in relation to the Greens, and we will talk about the Greens later. But in Dublin, Barry Andrews and Regina Doherty are always going to get there. You were one of those who wasn't convinced that Regina Doherty was a good choice for Fine Gael in Dublin because of this perception that she was out in Meath, although, as I pointed out to you, she was a Dublin woman who went to live in Meath and she was coming back into Dublin. And as a feisty performer, not afraid to take kicks at the likes of the Greens, I was surprised that you weren't entirely convinced by
Well, sorry, I was looking at polls for 2 years which said the combined total of FF and FG was 35%. The combined total of those parties, in actual fact, was nearer to 44%. So, go figure.
Yeah, but sorry, there was also a thing, wasn't it, that inside in Fine Gael, a lot of people did not want her to be the candidate. In fact, Leo Varadkar didn't want her to be the candidate. A couple of things about that.
So, here I was, got out of the 102 bus, got into the old AULD stand pub in Ratoath, and I was waiting to get a taxi to go to Fairyhouse Races. And I said, tell me this, is Regina Doherty from Ratoath? So the barman pointed over there. He said, that's where she lives, not 25 yards away. And her parents live across the road. And 25 years ago, so she spent, they moved there, her parents moved there. They were originally from, so she has never had her name on a Dublin ballot paper ever. So in other words, kudos to it. Harris spent 9 of the last 10 days of the campaign clutching onto her strings. They were most concerned about that seat. And the
well,
truth
at least it meant he didn't have to be down the west evading the Burkes.
And someone else said to me that if they had run someone like Kate O'Connell in this election, the true blue, like they did terribly well, Fine Gael, in Dunleary, Rathdown, those areas. Barry Andrews actually got some of that vote. He was seen as the more Dublin polished middle class, and it actually suited him that she was the candidate.
Yeah, but sorry, this comes back to the point, and this is relevant to what we'll be talking about for the general election. And I brought this up with you last week, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are transferring to each other.
Absolutely.
This has become, they will remain as individual,
like ourselves,
separate.
A bit of a surprising double act.
Exactly. But does that mean we're stuck together for years to come, Ivan?
Well, they're not stuck together. They
are.
You know what someone in Fine Gael described Michael Micheál Martin to be? He's like a stray cat trying to get back into the Taoiseach's office. The competition between them, which was absolutely a pissing contest.
Mutually beneficial.
For who got the most councillors. Like, what is the point of a couple of councillors here and there? Talk about, basically a pissing contest, I call it. But they both did extraordinarily well.
Toes.
Oh,
That's
absolutely.
good for them.
No, but the competition between them is intense.
So in Dublin you had those two, and then Lynn Boylan had a squeaky bum time for a little while. But
Claire Daly's elimination decided it for her. Yeah. Like that kind of hard left. But also...
But sorry, isn't that remarkable? Less than 11% vote for Sinn Féin in Dublin. When Lynn Boylan is a very impressive politician. She's one of Sinn Féin's strongest politicians. Although the one thing that I thought was disappointing to see was that given how strong her commitment is to environmental issues, she dialed it back during the election campaign. She didn't want to be seen almost to be an environmentalist, which in some respects is as strong for her as her republicanism.
Yeah. So a couple of things there on Sinn Féin in Dublin. First of all, the two-candidate strategy. I think they would have had the seat handier if they ran one candidate. Daithí Doolan did transfer to her, but I think... I always say a confused mind doesn't buy if you're just selling, as they did with Regina and Barry Andrews, selling one product and get, if you support us, support this candidate, would have been a simpler message. They were probably looking at the prospect of 2 seats there, which was never really on in what transpired. Kieran Cuff, I have to say, was an outstanding MEP. He actually, there's a new directive becoming a regulation in relation to buildings, energy efficiency and biodiversity and all this kind of solar insulation, all that. He's actually done some good work.
He's a serious politician.
He is a serious politician.
As indeed many people are saying Grace O'Sullivan
Absolutely.
in Ireland South as
and
well,
very hard-working.
that we've actually lost 2 of our best politicians.
Yes.
If you set aside, even if you don't, people who don't like Green Party policies would actually say they were 2 very hard-working, committed, bright, enthusiastic, diligent MEPs.
So we have to look at Niall Boylan. So Niall Boylan...
Do we have to?
Yes, 50,000 votes. Yeah, you cannot just take democracy as it is. I know it's inconvenient, and I'm going to come back about something that I really think is the heart of the Sinn Féin problem, and it's something that you and Hillary Clinton and 2016, a thing called the deplorables, because I feel you have a sense of the deplorables, and you know when we talk about some of these what you would call far right, I just look at them as horses in a race and candidates. Niall Boylan from nowhere with no infrastructure. Independent Ireland do have a structure outside of Dublin. It's rural, it's anti-green, it's bedded in TDs and councillors from West Cork to Roscommon. They don't have that infrastructure in Dublin. For him to get 50,000 was an achievement. Now, I know he's spiky and I know he's not everyone's cup of tea, and I know he's kind of pugnacious and terrier-like. He doesn't half call it, he really calls it.
He calls out bullshit.
Yeah, but sorry,
he calls out nonsense. He's deliberately offensive.
There's a market for nonsense.
And for being deliberately
I've lived
offensive.
for 40 years off the market for nonsense. No, but sometimes you've got to acknowledge a loser who does well. But in any event, the last seat ended up going to Aaron O'Riordan. So, first of all, he put in a cracking campaign. And when I saw the first count, I said, you know what, when you look at Breed Smith, when you look at Claire Daly and all those, all he has to do is keep ahead of them, and he will be the most likely to, more than Cuff.
Yeah, I thought it was between himself and Cuff from the minute I saw it.
But I thought the left label was worth more than the green label. And you must remember, his heartland is North Central area, Richard Bruton's area and all that kind of thing. So that would have been a strong, solid local connection.
Do you know, Labour have had two very good results since for Banabachik to win the by-election when Owen Murphy went was a big result, big outcome, bringing her into the Dáil. And now to win a seat in European elections, this gives Labour a bit of
and it's a bit better. So Alan Kelly, who only rings me when he wants me to say something on air and doesn't reply to my texts, he texts me that 3 new Labour councillors from Carrick-on-Shore to Nina got elected. So it's not just an urban thing. Yeah. Both Labour and the Soc Dems had very decent results on the upper scale of their expectations, and it does set the seeds of a future success. Okay. And especially if Sinn Féin have a bad day again. Okay, well, let's come into the South constituency. So tell us about your thing about the John Mullins situation and the ructions in Fine Gael. So they managed to get 2 seats in Midlands North West and didn't come close to it. So the first thing, we look at the scores on the doors. Fine Gael got a total of 155,000 votes and got 1 seat. And had a fairly early elimination. Fianna Fáil got 144,000 votes, 11,000 less, and got 2 seats. That hurts. That hurts, right, for Fine Gael people. And so was Sean Kelly hogging the votes? Well, number one, there was no proper effective management strategy of votes. Secondly, I rate FGers to say, how could you have 4 eastern counties, Carlow, Kilkenny, Wicklow, Wexford, with no candidate at all? Because the Kerry and Cork candidate. Now, conversely, people have said to me, people sort of like your ilk, which say, how could you not have a Cork candidate? Well, maybe you should consider not having a Cork candidate. I never said that. No, I'm not sure, but Cork people believe they have a divine right to democracy and all this good stuff. So, but actually, the way this is working out, the guy taking the hit for this is the Director of Elections, Simon Coveney. And that Mullins is a pal of his, and maybe he'd be a stand-in, either to go in Cork East for David Staunton's seat or in Cork South Central if Simon steps down, although Jerry Buttimer's there. So, but to get the Cork business vote, the Merchant Prince vote and all that kind of thing. But there is a lot of criticism. How did we let, on a day where Fine Gael could have got 2 seats there, let that slip because there was enough votes for it? How did we let Sean Kelly run riot over the entire constituency? Now, it's a little bit after timing insofar as that, but the feeling is that if a TD from the southeast corner had run, they might have won that seat. Okay. You predicted over 300 seats for independents. They got nowhere near it. Now, I have a theory as to why that happened, because the vote was strong, but this comes down to everyone is talking about Sinn Féin running too many candidates. There were too many independents. We'll just say, if you just look at the categorisation, they have 2 things, independence, and then they have other. Yeah. And other includes Independent Ireland, and I really call those independents. Like, Ciara Malooly is an independent. So the fact of the matter is the characterisation, you've got to put both of those together. But certainly, I think they were right up there in terms of... So the overview of this election for me, if you take both together, is there was 4 Tier 1 groups. The Independent, we'll call them just a label, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Sinn Féin. You know, you had them last week as a tier above Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Sinn Féin. Absolutely. You've now grouped them all together. Absolutely. Well, put it like this. The big story of this campaign is what happened to Sinn Féin. So, well established now. They got the most votes in the last general election, 24.5%. They sailed up in the polls, particularly after lockdown ended. From 2022 on into 23, right into the spring of this year, they were polling somewhere between 28 and 36%. Okay, actually the peak at 36% was in October 22 in the Red Sea Business Poll Post. That was the actual peak. So... It started down from October 22. So, first of all,
Sorry, that was at the peak of inflation as well.
So, first of all, let's just say this. Because one of the things that has puzzled me, genuinely puzzled me, I've spoken to senior Fianna Fáil people, do know, and we discussed this, if you get less than 17%, it's worse than 2011, where they got 17.4% at their nadir after the trike. Could this possibly be true? And this would be TDs and councillors and strategists say, Ivan, it's just not true. I cannot see us going below 20%. And this is at all stages. So every Sunday, I turn on my radio or TV, Brendan O'Connor Show, Anton Savage Show, The Week in Politics. And they are digesting the entrails of this Sunday Times poll, this Red C poll, Ireland Thinks poll, MRBI Ipsos poll, and so on. And you know what? They have not been fit for purpose. They have not, if this is reflecting voting intentions, the one thing they haven't done is reflected voting intentions. Now, they can argue that it's a snapshot in time and that you could see the momentum then coming down. Horseshit. What is the point of having this analysis for 2 years? If you're saying the only poll that matters is when the election is called and to track it every day, everybody would be better to put their money into focus groups and different types of research rather than these polls. Now, they are actually not talking to real people. They're talking to say, but there is a systemic failure. They actually haven't been too bad at indicating where Labour is at, where Fine Gael is at, but they have had structural failures in assessing where Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin are, both on the way up and the way down.
Okay, give me a few minutes on this, and I'll tell you where I'm coming from on this. Many, many years ago, I was editor of the Sunday Tribune newspaper, now defunct. I was editor between 1996 and the end of 2002. In those 6 and a bit years, we ran one opinion poll in the entire time. The only reason we ran it was at the insistence of the then managing director, Jim Farrelly, since deceased. And his belief was, and this fed into my contempt for newspapers using polls, is that it would get us on the 9 o'clock news on the Saturday night like free advertising.
And does?
It does. That's one of the main reasons why opinion polls are done by newspapers or sometimes are sponsored by the likes of Paddy Power, is because it gets them free advertising. They are the equivalent of journalistic junk food. They are useless when journalists should be actually doing the work and finding out what's going on, what the issues are, reporting on them. Instead, we give over acres of space to these damn opinion polls, which are your fast food equivalent, which are you eat them, you get a sugar rush off them, and then they're worthless to you. So we're in agreement, I think, for different reasons. I
didn't see the motivation as clearly as you've spelled it out, because it also gets their editor, their Paul Core, onto all the chat shows.
Absolutely. It's a nonsense, right? And on the radio on the last word, we very, very rarely actually cover the polls as such. No, they might end up working their way into a more general conversation about something else, but we don't do items. Have you seen the new opinion poll? I think the vast majority of people don't give a damn about them either. Apart from being worthless, I think the most people who are, and actually that's another thing. I mean, the numbers who voted last week is an interesting phenomenon.
We will come back.
And we'll come back to that, right? So
can I just say this? Yeah. So I go to the races and I fancy Willie Mullins' horse in the bumper. And someone says to me, Ivan, I hear Gordon Elliott's horse has been burning up the gallops and so on. And I say, well, maybe I'll take a pull here and not back the Willie Mullins' horse. And then I find it opens up a 2-1 Gordon Elliott's, goes out to 6-1 and finished 6th. There is one thing worse than no information. Who do you fancy in the last? I have no clue. Someone giving you the wrong information. The polls have consistently given us the wrong information about Fianna Fáil and have to be called out for what it is. And can I just say, my analogy about the polls is this. Just say you had a holiday home in West Cork and we were to do a poll on holiday intentions. And you could say, geez, I could go to Sardinia, I could go to Marbella, I might go to the East Coast or the West Coast of the States. But actually, you don't have firm. Whereas if you have a place in Skull, you're definitely going to take your family holiday there. So some people you speak to actually might have said tick the box or a text that I'll vote for Sinn Féin or whatever. But it's inaccurate as that, because it doesn't tell you, which you're getting onto there in terms of turnout, whether these people are going to vote or not. And so, therefore, they need to be thrown in the bin.
Okay, when we come by betting, I do have to come back in the second part of the podcast to the Limerick Mural bet that you actually had.
Yeah, absolutely.
We will get back to that, I promise.
Okay.
But actually, in relation to the polls as well, I did say to you, I think last week and probably the previous week as well, I was sceptical about the Fianna Fáil figures because I thought at local level they would have candidate recognition, and that very much proved to be the case.
And incumbency.
And incumbency, right? The other thing in relation to it is a lot of these polls are being done at national level. And they're asking you, what are you going to vote in a general election? And people vote differently in a general election to the way they do in local and European
50% vote
elections.
different between local and Euros.
Yeah.
That was a scientific study was done on that for 2019.
Okay, because I know we need to take a break, but Jeremy, just before we do take the break, can we just talk about the turnout?
Yeah.
Because, what was it, 44%? You said it would be 50 to 55%.
It varied. It was higher in this. So I look at the Euro constituents because the local, there's 166 different turnouts, right? Because the LEAs. 1.8 million people went to vote. And in Dublin, it was significantly lower at 43%, something like 48% in the south. So rural people tend to vote more. But can I just tell you this? Out of the mouth of babes, I was trying to clear my head. I took a walk along the river and I met a good friend of mine. He's a retired bank manager and his wife a retired teacher. And they'd be very bright people. And I said, how did you get on in the poll clerking? I said, it was a long old day because I voted at 7 a.m. last Friday to 10 p.m. They said it was all right. And I walked 10 yards on and Andrew roared back to me, the young people, there were no young voters. Like this would be an observant guy. And that anecdote summed up this election to me, that working people, welfare people and youngsters did not vote.
So will they vote in the general election? Because traditionally the vote in the general election could be as much as 15% higher, 15 points higher.
63 plays 49.
Yeah, so that's going to make a significant difference. So you can't read too much into these figures from the local and European elections.
It's like it's playing drafts and playing chess. I mean, but
so you know what I really enjoyed?
The momentum is a factor.
It is, but you know what I also really enjoyed is that some of the tossers on the right were built up this whole
Get off the fence anyway.
They're bussing in immigrants to vote.
I saw videos of that.
Oh, did you see videos of that? Yeah. I wonder what country those videos came from. This
country and
nonsense,
Western mostly.
This nonsense. They're signing in 600 Ukrainians to vote and they're bussing them in, and that's where they're getting the votes from. Completely ignoring, as we discussed last week, that people have been entitled as residents of the country, even if they're not citizens, since the 1960s to vote in our local elections. They won't be voting in our general election, but they were entitled to. But it didn't stop the losers from continuing to peddle their nonsense. So let's talk a little bit more about Sinn Féin.
Yeah.
Particularly on the basis that what's happened in the local elections may not be pertinent to what happens in the general election when it comes. However, give me a couple of minutes where I want to posit something to you, right? And this is the basis of my Business Post column for the weekend as well.
I'm glad to help you with your columns.
It's already written. It's already written, Ivan. I won't be going back changing it on the basis of what you said. Okay, but here we go. Back in 2020, Sinn Féin went into the general election campaign off a local election result of 9.5%. Nobody saw the potential for Mary Lou McDonald becoming Taoiseach, and she was excluded from leader debates. And Virgin ran a debate. We did the one with all of the party leaders. But
complete shout fest, yeah.
Well, that was your fault as well. We won't get into that one. Anyway, Pat Kenny did one with Leo Varadkar and Micheál Martin. And then RT did their panel one. And then they decided, because of the backlash about the exclusion of Mary Lou McDonald, to involve her in their final debate. And it created a momentum for her, because the anti-establishment vote said, look, the media are colluding with the main parties and they're putting her out. And I think that was a major part of Sinn Féin's benefit bounce at the time, that they got up to the 24.5%, because when she got into the debates, she performed well. But it was the anti-establishment thing, the stitch up, right? So then they built on that. I think they thought their foundations were firmer than they actually were. They subsequently have been proven to be flimsy. The problem then is now, if you look at that, so maybe Sinn Féin is thinking, look, we've had a disastrous local and European elections, but we can build back up off that. They have two major problems. One is that 24.5%, if they're able to get back to that, still isn't enough to put them in pole position to dictate the next government formation. The second is, they wanted to go well beyond that. Their ambition was to go 30 plus. They now might be going, can we get back to 24.5? But this time it's different, because they don't have that anti-establishment vote automatically looking to them, because now we have the rise of these independents who we've been talking about throughout the country, of different hues of independence, but basically tapping into an anti-establishment thing. And Sinn Féin has to try and regain that by saying, well, look, we're the ones who go into government. Independents aren't going to form a government. But I think it's going to be far harder for them in the next general election than it was in the last.
So, Sinn Féin, first of all, undeniably, historically, one of their worst performances ever. Back in the day, under Gerry Adams, Martin McGuinness stood for the presidential election. 13% has been a baseline, except for 2019, which was just desperate. A couple of things. First of all, there is a structural problem which they can't solve, and that is what I call the deplorables. So I would say 4% of their support and up to 1,000 activists are ultra-nationalist people. These are the people who are saying the traitors on the marches and who are carrying the tricolour. They were Sinn Féin. The situation is, can they get, we'll call them, for want of a better word, the deplorables, which I think are 4% of the vote, and you might call them far right, or you might call them obnoxious or whatever, but they were voting Sinn Féin back in 2020. I think there's a structural rock in the road there. Sinn Féin either actually have to reverse, like we said, I said they should change their policy on migration. I don't think it's even credible now for them to change it sufficiently.
So they have changed it. If you look at some of the literature that went out from some of the candidates.
The deplorables are not back with them, like they haven't changed it enough.
They know what their position was, they know what they've changed, they don't trust them anymore.
The second issue is this, that, and I think we have to call this out as it is. There has been an element of hubris amongst Sinn Féin, particularly evident in the spring of this year. It's almost like in Dáil exchanges. Don't you know we're the largest party? We have a mandate, and almost like they're in the government in waiting. And that
presumptive Taoiseach.
Yeah. So therefore, humility.
In the way that Eamon Gilmore was once.
Yeah, exactly. Him? So humility rather than hubris is absolutely vital. I was thinking back. What could have happened? And I actually lost sleep over this. What could have happened in 2020 other than the exclusion point? And Micheál doubled down on the exclusion point, saying, no matter what they get, we're not going to go into government with them. And it drove Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil together, which was exclusionary. But there was one issue that did catch fire. And that was the pension cuts.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
That the pension age is going to be raised to 70, and basically all the hardworking people in their 50s looking forward to the retirement day, a lot of them doing physical work, said, well, we're not going to vote for that. And Sinn Féin got the zeitgeist against that. So put it like that.
That's not available for them.
That's my point. And
I'll tell you something else that's really interesting, because in fairness to Sinn Féin, and I don't want this to sound like we're Sinn Féin bashing, because there's a certain number of their most prominent people. Now, they don't have a big pool of prominent people, which is another problem for them. They're very reliant on a small number of TDs for the intellectual heft that they would bring into a government. But Eoin O'Brien, even whatever you might think of his housing proposals and solutions, has worked very hard and has engaged with all the property developers and discussed it with them. David Cullinane has gone to all of the stakeholders in relation to health. He genuinely has done his homework. He is well schooled in all of this. I've interviewed him at things about that, and he is impressive in his knowledge and his detail. You might not necessarily agree with all of the solutions that he's putting forward. And then you have Pierce Doherty has gone out of his way to deal with the banks and financial institutions or whatever. And that actually in itself, I think, has become part of the problem, because in trying to appeal to the middle ground and show that they're responsible, that change will be more subtle than radical, a lot of their supporters are going, I thought you were the ones who were going to blow up the system. Now you're talking about resculpturing it and reforming it. So even if you had the Pierce Doherty with Davies recently, and Davies in London writing a note afterwards saying he's not going to be a Jeremy Corbyn type, that these people are going to be respectable, that then means that they're becoming part of the establishment, and that's what the anti-establishment vote hates.
Yeah, well, there's two things there. Mary Lou, obviously in a moment of distress, came out with what can only be described as the asinine comment. One of the reasons we bid badly, she said this outside the RDS, is people think we're in government. I know nobody who thinks that Sinn Féin are in government. Like, how bizarre, like how stupid do you think Mary Lou, the electorate, is? But what I did hear was, and a Fine Gael TD who's a seasoned guy who spent a lot of time on the doors said, you would always meet in every election. Cheers are all the same. You know what I mean? And for the first time, they were including Sinn Féin in that. In other words, so that's the difference. They don't. On the policy question, I'm a little bit of a policy wonk myself, and I take policy seriously. And I have to say, on health and housing, that actually, and Micheál Martin said, if Sinn Féin want to do a post-mortem, they should look at policy. They don't have policies. They've only sound bites on change. The truth of it is, if you look at their health and housing policy, their solution is to throw money at it, like 3 billion each at it. Now, let me point. We have a situation in this country that nearly 60% of all taxes are paid by 10% of the people. So we'll take that top 100,000 people. They're saying to themselves, hold on a second. This is my money that they're going to throw at this. This isn't funny money or other money or borrowed money. It's my money. And therefore, the middle class backlash has actually worked out. Their policy is to tax more and spend more. And they don't like that.
It's worse than that, because there is, I think, a well-founded belief amongst people that the state doesn't necessarily do delivery particularly well. And Sinn Féin's solution is to give the state more responsibility, and that they say somehow it'll work better because they're in charge. So housing, this comes
Will
down
they
to,
get value if they put another 2 billion into housing?
We already spend more public money on housing in Ireland than anywhere else in the EU. It might not seem difficult to believe, but we get one of the worst returns from it. So Sinn Féin says we're going to do it better. When I interviewed Mary Lou McDonald in a few days before the election about the immigration issue, her problem seemed to be that just the government wasn't implementing its processes and systems well enough. We'll implement them better. And I wonder, do people actually really believe that they will do
the same
these
civil
things?
servants.
So you also have, Mary Lou McDonald is probably fortunate in some respects that there's the British general election underway, and that Sinn Féin is looking to retain its 7 seats. And apparently up north, they're not happy with her because she created the impression that they expect to add seats. And they're not going to add seats.
They might get one more.
They might get one more.
Okay,
That's the
we
best.
went through that.
But the idea that suddenly there's going to be another surge up north is one she's created an expectation up north they're not happy with. But anyway, you look back through her record over the last 12 months. She performed poorly in relation to the Dublin riots, where she seemed to take the side of the rioters over the Gardaí, which was not what the vast majority of the public would have agreed with. She spoke about €300,000 homes. Had to clarify that she meant new builds rather than collapsing the price of existing houses. And, the old expression, when you're explaining, you're losing. And she's been having to explain that ever since. And there's been a whole variety of issues.
I put it like this, just because everyone's doing a pile on to Mary Lou, I'll probably just say I do respect her. I actually think she's got a decent intellect. I think she's a good campaigner. She's feisty, but I think the hubris thing was the problem.
She's the best thing that Sinn Féin have.
And let's be clear,
they would be crazy to change.
Absolutely, and she's Dublin as well.
Change her as
but
leader.
we are in so far as we're rightly going through the down day for Sinn Féin. There is one person who has to take the credit in terms of the game changer this election. And you may say, I would say this anyway, but I think it's a statement of fact. After the referendums, because we did podcasts during that period, there was no bottom, there was no limit to how low Fine Gael could go. The Tory thing, as we see playing out 14 years in power, is just one darn thing after another. Your time is up. Simon Harris has completely changed the narrative. First of all, internally, he has got their mojo back. He's like the performance of the two ladies in Midland Northwest was shocking and stunning. Okay, just has to be said. But people tell me it was very noticeable at the doors. People said when they were canvassing after Easter and after the referendum, someone said to me, the vote at the doors, when Tent City was at its worst, people were in Enniscorthy and in Wexford, nowhere near Dublin 4, were frothing at the mouth about migration. Whatever Harris did and how he changed the dialogue and getting rid of the tents and doing some high-vis stuff, and you may say it's all a stunt and it's all populist.
Quasi-populist.
Right, no, but the point about it is this. The doorsteps weren't frothing at the mouth anymore. They felt that there was somebody listening and moving, and it actually changed the dial, both in terms of Fine Gael being in a death spiral and in terms of actually putting his finger on what was causing the bleeding.
So do you remember when Leo Varadkar quit and you were outraged? How could he do this only 8 weeks before elections? What has he done?
You think Leo saw this
candidate?
coming? He was getting off the train before it crashed.
Exactly.
That's what he was doing.
But I said to you at the time that he was doing the right thing by Fine Gael, even if he was being self-serving, that he was doing the right thing by Fine Gael, that he gave them a chance, and Harris has taken that chance.
Well, put it like this: I don't think in people's wildest imaginations, Harris, as a newbie, could have done as well. The other great thing, he's just I call him Houdini Harris from this point of view, that the sort of stale argument, because Simon Coveney and Leo were full cabinet ministers going back to 2011, after the Troika and when Enda Kenny came in, and they've been high profile since then, there was a kind of both internally and externally, a sense of tiredness with them. Harris has completely changed that. And so therefore he is now, and what they're all doing is they are, and the next week is going to be pivotal to this, whatever they say about an election, and they have to say, it's like someone saying, I'm stepping down. You have to say, I'm not until you actually decide it. Selection conventions are now the most important thing in each party's playbook.
Maybe we'll talk about selection conventions next week, because you're making me work next week. I'm going away on holidays and you're making me dial in from abroad.
You'll have a pina colada one hand, you'll have the sunglasses on.
I don't drink.
You'll be on the deck chair. You say, Aileen, just give me another tomato juice there. I know what you'll be doing. I'll be like a slave listening. People said, Ivan, I'm literally mentally and physically exhausted. I'll talk to you next Monday or Tuesday about what's really going to happen in the parliamentary party. What's going to happen with Mary Lou, what's going to happen with everybody. Who's going to be the next commissioner. There is always in politics, in every election, there is significant fallout.
There is.
And there will be fallout next week.
So we will. I will take an hour out of my schedule.
You can dial it in like you do at the last word.
Actually, the other thing I'm laughing at is the idea of me telling Aileen to get me a drink. That may be the way your marriage to Deirdre works. It certainly isn't the way that mine works. Anyway.
Do you give Harris any credit?
Yes, Harris Hop, absolutely. And I mean, I said it last week that, I was wondering how well the quasi-populist approach he was taking is doing. And I was laughing last week, though. He was doing a series of interviews. I'm only 61 days Taoiseach. The following, I'm only 62 days Taoiseach. The following, I'm only 63 days Taoiseach. Come on now, like.
Sorry, this won't last.
No,
this
it won't last.
Like, I know how this story ends in tears, because the very thing that Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil lent into this time, and I said this to you last week, where for the monster raving loony party, you have a hard-working councillor, they will hold their seat. So you had, coming into this election, 250-odd councillors for Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, and a lot of them were going to get re-elected on their own merits. And in the next general election, half of the Fine Gael parliamentary party will not be standing. So I just take Donegal as an example. So if you extrapolate, I'm saying now there will be a Micah TD elected. There will be at least 2 Sinn Féin, and there'll be basically a real impossibility of holding that Fine Gael seat. And sorry, in a couple of years' time, a new person will come along, but the idea that these retirements won't have an impact right through from Charlie Flanagan to Richard Bruton and at all points in between, Paul Keogh, I could go John Paul Phelan, it is absolutely, and I think there's more to come.
Okay. We'll get back to that next week. Timing of the general election. I'm now putting my money on the 25th of October.
Yeah, I noticed you never picked the 5th of November for some reason.
8th of November.
That's the presidential election in the US.
That's a Tuesday. We don't have our elections on a Tuesday.
Yeah, no, would you understand me? Like, you either pick an All Blacks match or something that's very important to you, or your trip to Washington or New York, as you keep telling me.
I think the 25th is no, because that's just before the clocks turn back.
Well, just on this, I got a text from a senior government person who said, hear you about an election, because I've been saying this for a year now, that the election was going to be in November, 15th of November, give or take, and so on. They said, well, I'm just on a matter of fact. It's not the 8th of December these by-elections have to be held, as we now know 3 of them. It's actually the 13th of January. From the point of view, it's the day they take up residence in Brussels and signed into the Parliament. So, does that make any difference? You're not going to have a Christmas by-election. So, I would say, first of all, the Greens will want to cling on to the last hour of the last day of the 22nd of March, because they know they're heading turkeys and Christmas.
Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil care about what
they're already getting the choreography lined up to show that the Greens, he made me do this. You know, the bicycle lanes and the sustainability stuff in agriculture, like all that narrative is about to play in. You saw the first instalment of that with Regina Doherty having a swipe in the Dublin debate at Kieran Cuffin, doubling down on it subsequently. The Greens are very sore about that. They feel they've been stabbed in the front by the public and in the back by their colleagues in government. And they could be right about that because, you know, we're now getting into the kill zone. Yeah. It's kill or be killed. That's what these counts are about. Like, I talk to you in terms of a blood sport, but let's be clear. There are people today devastated. Take the mayor of Dublin. Dahi, you know, the guy he lost his seat. You know, the mayor of English lost his seat.
Sinead Gibney, who ran for the Social Democrats, who gave up her job, sold her car.
Niall Boylan gave up his job. So
I suspect Niall Boylan will be back in that job pretty quickly.
Do you think?
Yeah.
I heard different. But anyway, the point about it is this, that, and I heard that from my radio sources rather than my political sources. But the point I'm trying to make to you is this. This is life or death to a lot of people. It's income or no income. So these matters are, you know, intensely important in terms of careers and in terms of selection. And there's a lot going down at the moment. And we're getting into that phase now that I think people are going to say, right, we have to have the budget. It's the last bounce we're going to get. Did you notice the report stage of the planning bill, which was the only real piece of legislation that they had to get through? They have a bit more to go on that. So I actually think...
I think they failed to get that through in a guillotine last night.
Did they?
Yeah.
Did they? Because I knew they were going to try that.
They failed.
Right, they'll try again.
They will, because apparently that means if you were talking about an instant election, that chance is gone now.
Well, but put it like this: when the government lose a vote, Hildegard, what the F were you doing that we lost that vote? You should never lose a vote in government. And did you see, of the 3 by-elections, 2 of them are opposition and 1 are government. And I was actually looking at those constituencies. Next week I'll take a closer look at Clare. Joe Carey won't be standing for Fine Gael. They had 2 seats. They might have no seat. A by-election might suit them. In Carlow Kilkenny, again, John Paul Phelan not standing. It might suit them to blood a candidate in a by-election. This is just the Fine Gael perspective I'm looking at. And who's the other one? Barry Cowan.
Wouldn't it be crazy, though, to allow Sinn Féin the opportunity to regroup between now and next February or March, and indeed to go and have an election?
You're saying kick them when they're down? That's very uncharitable of you. But anyway, you're starting to sharpen your edge.
I'm only just looking at this from a completely neutral way from the outside. We've only a couple of other things to actually discuss. I actually have to bring it up. Last week...
Limerick.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you confidently predicted that Helen O'Donnell would become the mayor of Limerick.
And I backed her.
With a significant sum of money.
Well, not as significant because I couldn't get on. I wanted to have a significant... So, a couple of things about that. First of all, she did all right. She finished second. She was beaten by 5,000 votes. So, when I struck those bets, the favourite was D. Ryan. And someone told me that Willie would stop D. Ryan. Someone told me that Dan Butler, Fine Gael, I was told he wouldn't get elected. The big
this
shock
is the same person who gives you the bad information on the Gordon Elliott's horses.
There's about 4 different sources in Limerick. I put it like this. I admire John Moran's intellect, but I speak to people in the LDA and the Department of Finance who worked with him, and he no longer works in them. So let's just see how all that works out. But what I will say is this. His performance in electoral terms was extraordinary. Hats off to him to take on the entire might of every one of the political parties, to turn them into mincemeat, but not only that, to beat JP McManus's pony in the race, Helen O'Donnell, where I thought she had a glimmer of hope. Dan Butler, see,
she came from the Fine Gael stable.
And also her line was, I would have run for Fine Gael if they asked me, and they didn't, which is a clever line.
Okay, but
the point is, when he went out with 13,000 votes, she only got a minuscule. In fact, Moran got as many, which shows there was rancour during the thing.
I'll give you 2 things.
Can I just say,
Jesus, go on.
It's nothing to do with politics. I actually spent the weekend, because I was working on a news show, I had a right bet on Alcaraz to win the French Open. I was in the Aviva and I backed Leinster on the handicap, and I hammered Kilkenny to beat Dublin. So actually, it was a very profitable weekend.
You covered your
I more than
bet?
Covered. It was one of the best weekends I've had in a long time, because I wanted to get away from politics.
I've never heard of you having a losing bet.
No, I did have a losing bet.
Let me tell you a couple of things that I've taken from that situation in Limerick. The first was that when JP McManus endorsed Helen O'Donnell, we should have realised that her campaign wasn't going as well as they hoped. That he wouldn't have actually, maybe persuaded by his daughter, Sue-Ann, to come out and to make the endorsement, but that if she was in a really good position, they wouldn't have come out because there was almost an air of desperation in the actual endorsement, right? And the second thing is it's a real lesson in the exercise of soft power. JP McManus has an incredible amount of soft power in Limerick by nature of the charitable donations, sponsoring the hurling team. It gives him an enormous amount of clout. And I know people, very senior people in Limerick, and it's almost like if JP McManus says jump, they jump. He wants them at a meeting for something, they're at the meeting, right? But you exercise that power cleverly. You don't issue a statement saying, I'm voting.
Well, he's never done it before.
He hasn't done it before because he understands the importance of soft power.
Things.
And he's made a big mistake.
There's two things I'd say about that. Helen O'Donnell is part of his foundation. He has a foundation there and she's on the board of that. So there would be
it was enough for that to be known without him coming out and making a statement.
But one of his acolytes got in touch with me during the week and they said, you know that podcast you do with Matt? And you know the way Matt was given down the banks, you know, that JP should pay his taxes. And I freely admit JP's a friend of mine and I would be a defender of JP. And, you know, giving $1 million to every county board to me was wow, because he didn't have to do it. But you make the point, David, so would you ever tell Matt his eulogy and his idealising Tony O'Reilly, he was a tax exile too. So how can Matt be consistent in, you know, adorning everything to do with AJF and critical of other people who have not just immigrants, but they've gone abroad, done well, and put the money back into the country?
I can answer that very easily, but it'll take a couple of minutes, right?
Okay.
First, I've had people on behalf of him coming to me consistently over 25 years playing the little violin about would I leave poor JP alone, what a great man he is and all the rest of it. It's been
and the Kaiser?
Yeah, it's been, no, mind him. But going back to McManus, this goes back to my time as editor of the Tribune back in the 1990s. I've been getting the delegations sent to me to make pleadings on behalf of JP McManus. So I'm amused to hear that they're now taking the approach of going to you to say it. I've never actually hidden the fact that Tony O'Reilly was a tax exile. Read my book. It's all in there about, right? The only thing you would say, the difference
Are you
there
inconsistent
is,
a tad?
No, not inconsistent at all. Because
you know, the high altitude stakes?
The difference is that O'Reilly was working for Heinz where he made his money, and that's the fact that he was overseas. McManus left the country in the mid-1990s. He was already exceptionally wealthy when he left. O'Reilly made his money outside the country first and became wealthy and then added on his Irish assets. And also, we knew what O'Reilly's assets were. They were all publicly disclosed. We don't know what, apart from a few small things, what JP McManus really owns.
But what business is it of yours?
No, hold on a second. I don't know whether he's a billionaire or not. We don't actually have any empirical evidence.
Okay.
But I do know this, right? That it's very easy for somebody to come in and say, look at me, I'm dishing out money here, there and everywhere.
Which he doesn't have to do.
Which he doesn't have to do. I agree he doesn't have to do it, you know. But most of us don't have the choice as to where we pay our taxes. And, you know, you can come in and you can play, I'm the great guy who's looking after Limerick hurling and so on. You know, tax isn't a voluntary thing. When we pay our taxes, Ivan, we don't decide that we want 20% of it to go to the health service or 20% of it to be in my local area and all the rest of it. We do not know if all of the largesse that he donates in Ireland
and when do we
is less than the money he saves by not paying his income tax.
When do we get to the line, here ends the sermon?
I'm trying out the facts. I'm just putting out the facts.
No, and you're entitled to your opinion, and I'm entitled to mine.
Absolutely.
That he's a philanthropist, and he has done a lot for racing. He's done a lot for sport, and he's done an awful lot for Limerick.
You know who
and he's done a lot for
country?
Graduates as well.
And you know who's done an awful lot by
Michael O'Leary.
Michael O'Leary.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And I mean, you would say that I'm critical of Michael O'Leary, but I would give
But he's
Michael
critical. Well, he and you just don't get on for some reason.
I don't understand that. I don't understand. I wrote a very fair book about him, which was not critical, overly critical of him. It had criticisms of him, as you would of any person. But I would say, in great credit to Michael O'Leary, is that although he has developed an enormous amount of wealth, and he is a billionaire because you can see it from the Ryanair shareholdings and also from his property interests, we know that he is a guy who stayed in the country and has paid his taxes, and fair fucks to him for doing so.
All right. Well, here ends the lesson because I've got to go somewhere else today.
Right, you're making me work next week. I'm on a week's holidays.
Yes.
I'm off the last word. I'm not writing newspaper columns, and you're making me dial in from foreign. Oh, well,
That's
it better
okay.
be worth it, Ivan. It better be worth
okay,
it.
it will.
If you want to get in touch, email us at mail@pathtopower.com. And also, remember, recommend us to a friend. There's lots of people out there who still haven't heard of Path to Power. Maybe you want to keep it that way. But if you do want to let other people know, it's available on Spotify, Apple, wherever it is you get your podcast. So until the next time, from me, Matt Cooper.
From me, Ivan Yates.
Thanks for listening.